The global impact of economic sanctions. Introduction. Economic sanctions are one of the most primary tools used by governments or international organizations to enforce political, economic, or humanitarian objectives. They are typically implemented in response to violations of international law, human rights abuses, or threats to global security. Sanctions can take many forms, including trade restrictions, asset freezes, travel bans, and financial penalties. While they are intended to punish or influence a nation or entity's behavior, the global consequences of sanctions are far-reaching, affecting not only the targeted country but also global trade, financial markets, and international relations. In this article, we will explore the 14 key impacts of economic sanctions on the global economy and political landscape. Types of economic sanctions. Economic sanctions can be categorized into several types, including trade sanctions, restrictions on the import or export of goods, services, or specific products. Financial sanctions, prohibiting financial transactions, freezing assets, or cutting off access to global financial systems. Travel sanctions, banning individuals from traveling or entering specific countries. Arms embargoes, restrictions on the sale or transfer of weapons to a sanctioned nation. Targeted sanctions directed at individuals, companies, or government officials rather than broad economic restrictions. Each type of sanction is tailored to achieve specific policy goals and is used strategically by countries or international organizations. Direct impact on the targeted economy. The most immediate and visible effect of economic sanctions is the direct impact on the economy of the targeted country. These impacts include decline in trade. Restrictions on imports and exports severely limit the country's ability to access international markets, leading to trade deficits and shortages of essential goods. Currency depreciation. Sanctions often result in a significant devaluation of the nation's currency, increasing inflation and eroding the purchasing power of citizens. Stunted growth. Lack of access to capital and markets can stifle investment and hinder the development of key sectors of the economy. Impact on global trade. Sanctions not only affect the targeted nation but can have ripple effects throughout the global trading system. Shifts in trade partners. Countries subjected to sanctions often turn to non-sanctioning countries to maintain their trade flow, leading to shifts in global trade patterns. Disruption of global supply chains. As a result of sanctions, multinational corporations may alter their supply chains, which could lead to increased costs and disruption in production for global markets. Impact on commodity markets. For example, sanctions on oil-producing nations like Iran and Venezuela lead to price volatility in global oil markets due to reduced supply. Humanitarian impact. Economic sanctions often target the economic capabilities of a country's government but can have unintended consequences for its civilian population. These effects include shortages of essential goods. Sanctions can lead to a lack of access to vital products such as food, medicine, and medical equipment, contributing to public health crises. Rising poverty. With industries crippled by sanctions, the general population faces job losses and economic hardships, leading to higher rates of poverty. Increased social unrest. Economic difficulties caused by sanctions can lead to social unrest, protests, and political instability, further complicating the situation. Effects on the global financial system. Sanctions targeting financial institutions or central banks of sanctioned countries can have significant impacts on the broader financial system. Disruption of global banking. Sanctions that block access to global financial networks such as the SWIFT system prevent the sanctioned nation from engaging in international financial transactions, complicating global finance. Shifting financial alliances. Countries subject to sanctions may seek to create alternative financial systems and banking relationships, as seen with Russia and China exploring non-dollar trading systems. Increased risk for global investors. imposition of sanctions increases geopolitical risk, making investors more hesitant to engage in markets where sanctions may rely. The role of multilateral sanctions. Multilateral sanctions, when imposed by international organizations like the United Nations or European Union, can be more impactful than unilateral sanctions. Their benefits include greater pressure on the targeted nations. Sanctions imposed by multiple countries increase pressure on the targeted nation, making it more difficult for them to circumvent the restrictions. Unified international stance. Multilateral sanctions can signal a unified global position to certain policies or actions, increasing the credibility of the sanctions. Challenges in coordination. Achieving consensus among international players can be challenging, as economic interests and geopolitical considerations often complicate multilateral agreements. Sanctions and political dynamics. Sanctions not only affect the economy but also the political landscape of the sanctioned nation. Empowerment of authoritarian regimes. In some cases, sanctions may strengthen the position of authoritarian leaders who can use the sanctions as a rallying point, portraying them as foreign interference. Political isolation. Countries subject to sanctions may become politically isolated, losing allies and becoming more dependent on non-Western powers, which could alter global power dynamics. International diplomacy. Countries often use sanctions as a part of broader diplomatic efforts to force a regime change or alter foreign policies, thus influencing the geopolitical order. Unintended consequences of sanctions. Despite being designed to bring about change, sanctions can have unintended effects that undermine their objectives. Humanitarian suffering. Sanctions, while targeting governments, can often lead to widespread suffering among civilians, harming those they are meant to protect. A strengthening of black markets. Sanctions often encourage the growth of black markets where goods are traded illegally, undermining the intended economic pressure on the government. Nationalistic reactions. In some cases, sanctions lead to a surge in nationalism, with citizens of the sanctioned country rallying behind their government in defiance of external pressure. Sanctions and global commodity markets. Sanctions on major global producers of key commodities such as oil, gas, or metals can disrupt commodity markets and global supply chains. Volatility in oil prices. When oil-producing countries like Iran or Venezuela are sanctioned, global oil markets experience increased volatility due to reduced supply. Impact on supply of precious metals. Sanctions on mining and precious metal exporting countries affect the global supply of commodities like gold and palladium. Resource diversion. Countries under sanctions may divert their resources to alternative markets, potentially changing the flow of critical resources globally. Sanctions and the rise of alternative currencies. To bypass the financial impact of sanctions, targeted countries may begin using alternative currencies for trade and investment. Shift to non-dollar currencies. Countries like Russia, Iran, and China have increasingly traded in non-dollar currencies to avoid the impact of US-led sanctions. Cryptocurrency usage. Some nations under economic sanctions have turned to cryptocurrencies as a means to conduct trade and evade financial restrictions. Alternative payment systems. Sanctioned countries may develop or adopt alternative payment systems outside of the traditional financial infrastructure, like SWIFT. Impact on global investors and investment strategies. Investors and global corporations face significant challenges when dealing with sanctioned countries. Increased risk exposure. The imposition of sanctions elevates political and economic risks, causing foreign investors to pull back from sanctioned nations or regions. Change in investment strategy. Investment strategies may need to adjust to avoid exposure to sanctioned entities. Investors often seek to mitigate risk by moving away from regions with active or imminent sanctions. Impact on portfolio diversifications. Sanctions restrict the ability of investors to diversify portfolios across regions. limiting growth opportunities in certain markets, encouraging innovation in sanctioned countries. In response to economic sanctions, some nations have had to become more self-reliant and innovative to survive. Development of domestic industries. Sanctions often force countries to develop their own industries, particularly in areas like technology, agriculture, and manufacturing. Technological innovation. Some countries use sanctions as an impetus to invest in new technologies, particularly in areas such as energy production, cybersecurity, and alternative finance, and strengthen domestic innovation. Sanctions can lead to increased investment in domestic research and development, which could potentially foster long-term economic growth in the future. The role of sanctions in global security. Economic sanctions are often used as a tool to promote global security and peace. However, they have mixed results. Impact on military regimes. Sanctions aimed at countries with military ambitions like North Korea or Iran may slow or deter weapon development programs, but they rarely lead to complete disarmament. Prevention of conflict escalation. Sanctions can also be used as means of de-escalating conflicts, providing a peaceful alternative to military intervention. Unintended security risks. In some cases, sanctions exacerbate tensions, leading to instability, civil conflict, or even acts of aggression against neighboring countries. Conclusion. Economic sanctions have become an essential tool in modern geopolitics, providing nations with the ability to influence the behavior of other countries without resorting to military force. While sanctions can exert significant pressure on the targeted nations, their effects are not always straightforward, and they often have unintended consequences on the global economy, humanitarian conditions, and diplomatic relations. Understanding the complex and multifaceted impact of sanctions is crucial for policymakers, investors, and global leaders to craft more effective and ethical economic strategies that can achieve their desired objectives while minimizing collateral damage.